It's currently midnight. This all went down about 45 minutes ago. My brother decided to make a late night run to the grocery store, but on his way back, his tire exploded, so he called my dad to come pick him up from the gas station he managed to pull into. There are some sketchy folk around that area, so my dad suggested we just change the tire and escort him home to make sure the donut didn't go flat too, because it's a fairly old spare. My dad calls me and asks me to bring the tools and a jack so we can change the tire. After the donut is on, my dad goes in front and my brother follows, and I follow behind my brother. We live on a back road off of another back road. Not many houses, lots of farmland, not much traffic, and lots of deer at night. So my dad and I turned on our LEDs that we use when we go off-roading when we got to our road so we could see deer well before they were a hazard. The fields stretch about a quarter mile from the road on either side, and the lights are bright enough so that I can just barely see the tree line past the fields. We get up to a bend in the road where a small patch of woods separates the field from the house beside it, and I see glowing eyes to my left, about 15 feet away from the patch of woods on the field side. There were lots of deer out, so I was on high alert. I slowed down and kept an eye on it. The thing had arms. It had a humanoid shape, a humanoid head. It was not far from the road, so it was lit up pretty bright. I have no doubts in my mind about what I saw. I was going about 15 miles an hour. It wasn't just a quick glimpse. I looked at it for at least 30 seconds before it was out of view. Once I realized that I had never seen anything like what I was seeing, I started honking my horn and pointing so that my brother and dad in front of me would look. But by then, they had already passed the patch of woods and couldn't see it. I would guess it was around 6 to 7 feet tall when standing, but it appeared to be either hunched over or kneeling on the ground. It was resting one elbow on something, and the other arm was straight. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Nosferatu, but its head and face looked very similar to his. It looked gaunt and pale, had pointed ears and glowing eyes. I am sure the glow was because of the lumens I was shining at it, but that at least tells me it's nocturnal. I live in North Carolina, if that helps anyone in figuring out what this is. I'm very concerned because it wasn't far from my home, and I've been hearing very strange noises at night the past few weeks. I took my puppy out to use the bathroom yesterday around 10 p.m., and I could hear something in the forest walking very slow. I know it wasn't a deer because the puppy was barking and it didn't run off. I didn't have a flashlight, so I kept my gun out in case it was a predator and it tried to eat my puppy. It was snapping big sticks, and it sounded heavy. I'm convinced it wasn't a bear, because we don't live in bear country. We've never even seen bear around here, and we go into the woods a lot. We also have a chain link fence all the way around our property line, including in the woods. We inspect it often, and I walked the perimeter today and none of it was damaged. Whatever this is, it's agile and smart enough to climb or jump over a fence without noticeably damaging it. a few months ago, I noticed a lot of scratches on the trees around my house. They were all no less than 7 foot off of the ground. So, in my mind, that took mountain lion out of the equation. If anyone finds this description familiar, please let me know. I was 13 and my cousin was 16. We used to go break into a nearby school at night. For the record, we wouldn't do anything to the property, just kind of wander the halls. To get there, we had to walk about a mile through orchards and fields. There was a road to the school. We decided to take the road that night because the moon was full and it was very bright and pretty. We get to about the halfway point, and we see someone crawl out of the cornfield to our right. They get up and notice us. They were about 20 feet away, so not far. And I could see in great detail the body and face. They were naked, completely hairless, white skin, black eyes, tiny pursed mouth, and backwards hind legs like a dog's. Like the joints weren't humanoid in the hind legs, but the rest of it was. They looked just as startled to see us as we were to see it. They quickly ran towards the orchard on our left. My cousin and I both exchanged dialogue, and when we came to an agreement about what exactly we had both just saw, we decided to head home in a hurry. Now, I'm writing this very formally because I don't want people to think I'm just making up a scary story. I've talked about this before with friends, and they dismissed it as an alien or that I'd been watching too many movies. The thing is, though, we genuinely weren't scared. We were initially confused to see someone crawl out of a cornfield. Concerned, maybe. Then they got up, and the look of surprise on its face matched our own. Alright everyone, so I had a recent encounter with, well, something. I'm not sure what it was, as I never actually saw it. But the encounter seems to be in line with things I've read here and other places. So here it goes. It was approximately 2 weeks ago, just before Halloween. Now, let me start by saying I'm not an avid outdoorsman. I love hiking, and I've spent countless hours in my city's 16 square mile park. But I'm not a mountain man by any means. The park is home to several indigenous mammals, birds, fish, and reptiles, and is full of small ponds, thick brush, and even swampy marshes in spots. There are designated hiking and biking trails that sprawl the area, but there are also several wild areas that aren't really maintained or used. Being that I have an adventurous streak, and that I also hate being around groups of people, I often find myself in these less ventured or wild areas. Now, it's worth noting that I've never really felt uncomfortable in this park. It's kind of like my safe place. I go there to get away, decompress after work, or just be alone sometimes. It feels like a second home in ways. Anyway, enough background information, I'm rambling. I just pulled up to one of the less commonly fished ponds, Beaver Lake, and I intended to circle to the far side, 3/4 mile away from my truck. On one of the hiking trails that goes right next to the tree line, and then into the tree line, and then push further back onto one of the old horse trails. Now this horse trail in particular doesn't get used much anymore. I can't say why for sure, but I've heard a myriad of different reasons from different people. Most logical explanation is that it's just not as convenient to get to anymore, and it gets pretty marshy when it rains. I'd be able to follow the normal hiking trail for the first 3/4 of a mile, but I'd have to fork left off of the trail once it went to the tree line. The gate to the old horse trail was about 500 yards to my 9 o'clock from there, just through an overgrown thicket and up a slight hill. I made my way over to the 4-foot gate and started exploring. I had about an hour and a half before sunset, and I have a strict screw the woods at night policy, so I was watching the time. My main goal for this adventure was to snap some pictures of the area for a project I've been working on. And I'll admit, I was more distracted than I typically am. Anyway, close to an hour passed. I'd gotten some good shots, and I figured now was a good time for my egress. It'd take me close to 30 minutes to get back to my truck, and I wasn't keen on getting stuck in an unfamiliar area at night. I sat my backpack down on a stump, dropped to one knee, and started packing and organizing my stuff. I'm not sure what the catalyst was, but I suddenly felt this terrible sense of dread. I slowly turned and scanned my surroundings. Nothing seemed out of place. I stood up and grabbed my bag. When I took a step forward, a leaf crunched under my boot, and I realized that everything was dead silent. Now, as I said above, I'm not an avid outdoorsman by any means, but I know well enough that silence like that is an indication that a predator is nearby, and you need to quickly but calmly make your way out of the area and stay vigilant. It's worth noting that while mountain lions and black bear are not technically indigenous to my area, there have been more than enough caught and relocated for it to be a valid concern. I've been stalked by a mountain lion on one other occasion, and this felt eerily similar, so that was at the forefront of my mind. I'd been moving for about probably 5 minutes, and everything honestly seemed fine. I'd lulled myself into believing that I was overreacting, and that everything was fine. I didn't see anything, I didn't hear anything. Good, right? Wrong. By this point, the trail was completely overgrown on both sides. I could see fairly clearly behind me, and a decent way ahead. But my left and right may as well have been fall-colored walls. I must have gotten lost in thought for a moment, because I tripped on a root and ate it. As I was picking myself up, I started hearing a soft, cooing or chittering off to my right. It sounded like a mix between a dove and the predator. It would start with a coo, or yelp, and end with this weird chittering sound. I'm actually sitting here trying to replicate it, and I sound ridiculous. I'm not sure my throat is even capable of recreating it. Anyway, I'm out of shape, and there's no way I'm outrunning anything. So I scramble up, planted my feet, and try to make myself look as menacing as a fat 22-year-old with a backpack and glasses can look. About 100 yards ahead of me, which would have originally been behind me had I not fallen, so towards where I had taken the pics and was moving away from, I saw the underbrush start to shake, and it sounded like something was tearing through it. I only had maybe 20 minutes of daylight at this point, and it would take me at least that long to make my way back to my truck. So I did exactly what you're not supposed to do. Naturally, I turned around and I booked it, knowing good and well that I can run for maybe a half mile, 3/4 of a mile if something's trying to kill me, maybe. I could barely hear anything now over my own footfalls and the sound of my heart pounding. But whatever it was chasing me through the underbrush, and it was gaining on me. It may have been 15 yards behind me at this point, and I still had a ways to go. I don't know if fear kept me going or what, but I reached deeper and just kept running. My breathing got shallow, my vision started blurring, and I was honestly about to collapse when I saw the gate to the horse trail about 300 yards ahead of me. This thing is right on top of me by now, and as soon as I came within arm's reach of the gate, I planted my foot on the bottom rung and launched myself over it. My landing was not graceful. I landed on my right shoulder and tumbled several yards down the hill and into a puddle of muck. I wasn't thinking straight now, and I stood up shakily and started making my way toward the tree line and pond. I knew what directions to go, and I didn't even bother finding the hiking trail. I just crashed through the brush and overgrowth like some kind of barbarian. I didn't care about the cuts and scrapes or the massive amount of noise I was making. My only thought was to get out. The chittering noises had stopped, but I still heard something moving in the brush at the top of the hill. It wasn't trying to be quiet anymore either. I finally broke through the tree line and could see my truck parked across the pond at the top of the hill. I finally took a deep breath and started slowly walking away from the tree line. The ominous feeling lifted, and I started making my way up the trail alongside the tree line. I was able to catch my breath for about 15 seconds. I heard that awful cooing and chittering behind me again, and I turned to look back at the tree line behind me. So, at this point, there's trail leading to the tree line in front of me, tree line to my right, water to my left, and trail leading alongside the tree line and around the pond to the cars behind me. The underbrush at the tree line ahead of me started to shake, and fear took over. I'm thankful that my bag's waterproof, and that my phone is water resistant, because I jumped in the pond and swam across. I never really told this story to anyone in my personal life. They'd probably think I'm crazy, and I doubt they'd consider me credible, especially given my interest in Bigfoot and other cryptids. I don't know what was stalking me that day. I know I wound up cold, wet, and a bit shaken up. I also know I've not been back to that part of the park, and I can't come up with a good explanation. Beaver Lake is off limits to me for a while. I think I'll just continue exploring and hanging out on the slightly more populated side of the park. What do you guys think? My tale takes place a few weeks back while camping in the bush. This was my first break in several months from work, as I'm now a roadie for international bands. I decided to go camping with two old mates up in the bush for a few days, far away from the world as possible. I'm an experienced bushman and camped in the bush many a times over the years. We heard about a place way out at the back of a small town named Kyogle, at the back of Mount Lindsay. The locals call it Yowie country. A Yowie is an Australian equivalent of Bigfoot, an aboriginal mystic creature like the bunyip. So, just before the entrance to Kyogle is the gateway to the national park. After a few hours of driving, we finally found the old road that led to our purpose campsite. It was located on an old disused logging trail. Not many people, in fact no one, goes anywhere near here, which made it better for us. We left the truck 5 miles from where we were camped, and made our way up through the dense forest along the barely recognizable track, avoiding snakes and jumping ants, before we found our site. It took about 20 minutes to set up the site, tarpaulin over the branches to prevent rain from wetting us, a pit to bury our beer to keep it cool, and also food buried in it as well, and a decent fire pit. Gathered woods and twigs, we were ready for a good night of playing cards, drinking beer, and the usual BS. The night was clear as I remember, and hot. No moon, but the stars were like little eyes peering down at us. I had to go to water the old lizard, and stumbled off with the torch into the bush, hearing the lad's cat calling out, saying, "Beware of the boogeyman." I was more concerned about the bloody death adders and brown snakes, never mind about the bloody boogeyman. As I was doing my business and gazing at the stars, a strange and horrible smell, like something rotten, overwhelmed me. Like as if someone let off a fart that stunk so bad, it made my eyes burn in water. I stumbled back, gagging, but as I was stumbling back to the campsite, I thought I heard a deep growl, like when your stomach rumbles when you had nothing to eat but louder. The hairs on the back of my neck rose as I quickly hurried back to the site. I told the other two, but they said that it might have been some animal, so we went back to our card playing. It was 11:45 by now, and I was dead beat. I had my sleeping bag already unrolled, and crawled off after saying night to the other two, and slid into the bag. It wasn't long before I passed out. I don't know how long I was asleep, but the three of us were suddenly woken up by the strangest, loudest, spookiest piercing scream that I've ever heard. It was not human. It was inhuman. We sat up and looked at each other when we heard loud crashing coming towards our campsite, like a bulldozer rampaging through the bush. Whatever it was big. Then I saw it. Something massive, well built, coming crashing through the forest. I couldn't make out the details, but it looked strangely like a human, or even better, a gorilla. The smell will haunt me to the end of my days. It was that rotting stench like a corpse. This thing stood over 7 feet as it came tearing through the campsite, then vanished into the night. We all jumped up, gibbering like madmen about what we just witnessed. Was it just some hippie that just smoked some potent weed? No, can't have been. Too tall and well built to be a hippie. But it smelled like one though. I tell you this, none of us slept that night. I had the hatchet ready while one of my mates had a huge branch. The other, I don't know what he had, but we waited until dawn popped its head over the ridge before we left. What we saw in the daylight frightened us. The small saplings were all bent back and snapped. Some of our gear was trampled beyond repair, but we were shaken by our experience that we drove into town. We didn't tell the locals about what we saw or heard, in case they thought we were nuts. I did find out, though, that a few weeks after we saw that, someone else had the same experience, a few miles from where we were. I don't know what we saw, but I'm put off from camping up there. Maybe the locals are right when they saw that yowies exist in that region. I live in Geelong, Australia, and this sighting occurred a couple years ago. I don't live in a very big house, so my bedroom is really close to the kitchen. I always slept with my door open back when I was 15, 16 years old. My parents' bedroom is also close to the kitchen, which is where this creature was standing. The time was around 3:30 a.m. I remember waking up. I would wake up randomly sometimes. It doesn't happen anymore. And I was facing my wall with my back towards the kitchen. I rolled over to my other side, and as soon as I did this, my eyes adjusted to the light in the kitchen. Then they fixated to the door, which led to where my parents' room was, which is also the entry into my kitchen. This is when I spotted the creature. It wasn't very big, measuring around 80 centimeters. It resembled a goblin or gremlin. I could not tell for sure what it was. It was slightly dark, but bright enough for me to get a rough figure. It had very distinct ears, which is what gave it away. At the time, I couldn't move, probably because I was about to crap myself. Me and this creature exchanged looks for about a minute. It was just peeking around the side of the door, looking at me, standing very still. All I did was look, because I was afraid that if I moved, it would run off or attack me. After watching it for some time, paralyzed, I quickly rolled back over to face the wall. I turned back to see if it was still watching me, but it had disappeared. The creature has never returned since then. This story happened to my grandpa's sister. My grandpa lived in a village along with his siblings and parents when he was young. His sister was 21 years at that time. It was winter evening. She was returning from a neighbor's home. The distance between the two houses was almost a kilometer. As it was winter, the road was covered with mist and wind was very chilly. My grand aunt was carrying a torch in her hand because of the darkness and mist. She was moving quickly. Suddenly, her torch focused on something standing in the middle of the road. It was a dark, shadow-like creature. The scary thing was, even when the torch focused on the thing, it was pitch black. None of its features were clear, only the eyes were visible. They were glowing red. She got startled and moved back. The creature moved towards her. As it was coming closer, it was constantly changing shape. The only thing common was his black texture. My grand aunt started screaming for help. She ran back towards the neighbor's home. When she reached their home, it vanished within the mist. The neighbors were surprised to see her panting like that. They asked her to come in. She was reluctant to go out in the night. There were no telephones at that time, so they sent their son to inform my great-grandpa about her. My great-grandpa came to take her home with him. She didn't speak a single word until morning. In the morning, she recited her incident to the whole family. My grandpa's grandmother explained that it was a Chihuahua shapeshifter. It is kind of a notorious spirit that scares people by changing its shape or size. It looks for people who are alone in desolate areas. My grand aunt was alone, so she fell prey to it. She was lucky to get away from it. My grandpa said the incident haunted his sister so much that she didn't go out of house for a week. She's 73 years old, but still avoids staying alone, even at home. I'm a 20-year-old female living in Ontario, Canada. The incident that I'm going to relate took place 10 years ago, but it has been bothering me ever since. and when I found this site, I decided to share my story and see if anyone has any opinions. Of course, as it was an entire decade ago, this is by no means an urgent request for information, as the monster or whatever it was has not reappeared since. I suppose I'm just more curious than anything else, and want to know if anyone else has seen anything similar. What I'm going to do is describe the room and what I saw, and then explain why it couldn't have been a dream. I sleep in the same room as I did when I was 10, but the layout has changed. When this story takes place, my bed was in the corner of the room, so the headboard was against one wall, and the right side was against the other. At the foot of my bed was an armoire, which was not pushed against the wall because there was an electrical outlet behind it, which my lamp plugged into. The armoire was maybe 4 or 5 inches away from the wall. The door to my room is in the corner farthest from my bed. Also, there is a street lamp right outside my window, so even at night my room is never very dark. When I was a kid, I would never close my eyes while waiting to fall asleep. I don't really know why. I would lie in my bed listening to books on tape and staring at the ceiling. But after what I saw that night when I was 10, I always kept my eyes tightly shut. The first thing that happened was I heard a soft creak and looked to see one of the doors of my armoire opening gently, not abruptly at all. And then it closed just as softly. At this point, I was not afraid. I was actually oddly calm considering how nervous of a child I was. I remember thinking, it must have just been the wind, which makes no sense because even if the wind could have done that, my window was closed. Then I saw it. A monster or creature or something, I don't know. In the space between my armoire and the wall, I saw a face. It was green with red eyes and horribly red lips. It had a very skinny body with long arms. The body was humanoid. Its head was very round and looked smooth. I did nothing for a moment, but then it gave me this terrible grin, and I bolted from my room all the way to the basement where my father was working and told him. Of course, he couldn't find anything, told me it was just a nightmare, and made me go back to bed. I would be tempted to also believe it was just a dream, but these are the 3 reasons I know it can't have been. Firstly, my vision was not terrible at that age, but I did need glasses, which I obviously didn't wear to bed. When I saw that thing, it was visible, but just a little bit blurry. And no dream I've had, no matter how realistic, has replicated my vision without glasses. Secondly, I never woke up. When I have a bad dream and I wake from it, it takes me a few minutes to reorient myself, realize that it was a dream and that everything's okay. There was no transition like that. I saw the thing and ran. I never woke up. Thirdly and lastly, I mentioned that I fell asleep listening to the audiobooks. Well, I continued to hear my audiobook playing smoothly through the whole event, not stopping or distorting like I know it would have in a dream. I have never read that book since. After that, I never saw the thing again, although I had nightmares about it for the next year. If anyone has any ideas about this, I'd love to hear them. Even if you think I'm crazy, that's a valid opinion too. I hope my account was clear, and thank you very much for listening. My strange story took place on the 26th of September 2009. My church was on a retreat in Indiana, in a forest. The place we stayed at was a small building in the center of the forest. We decided that evening to go out and play in the forest with the children. So we came up with a game to play. It was like police. The kids were the police, and we would pick an adult to be the hostage. So when we began the game, we had to find the adult hiding in the forest in the middle of the night. So we start going around the back of the building, and we spotted a tall figure. It had to be at least 6 feet tall. It was running towards the trees, where there was a small open area with tall grass that goes up to your knees. It ran with its arms at the sides, but it stopped at the edge of the tall grass, as if to wait for us to get closer. We chased after it, thinking it was the adult. When we were finally a few yards away, it dove into the grass and started to crawl very fast, almost snake-like. We got weirded out, but stood there staring at it. When it got across the tall grass, it began to climb a tree. It looked somewhat like a deformed cat-like animal when it was climbing. Then a few moments later, a kid yelled, "I see him," and was pointing in an opposite direction. We saw a similar figure running a couple yards away, so we chased it, but then it vanished behind a tree. Turns out, a few minutes later, we found the adult hiding in the parking lot in front of the building the whole time. So, who knows what we saw that night in the forest? At least 15 kids saw the thing with me, so I know I'm not crazy. I was driving on Broadkill Road in Broadkill Beach, Delaware around dusk in July 2007. This road borders a swamp area. Standing on the side of the road by the swamp, my daughter and I saw a creature like we've never seen before. It stood about 2.5 to 3 feet tall, with long legs, a tan body, a flat, almost puggish face, and a long tail. It had small ears and looked to be around 30 pounds. My other daughter and her friend also saw the same animal the year before, around the same area. Except it was night, and it ran in front of their car. I asked the lady who owned the Broadkill Beach store about it, and she said she had seen it once when she was dirt biking with her dad in the area years before, and both her and her dad had no idea what it was, even though she was raised around Broadkill. She said we were lucky to have spotted it, as very few people have seen it. We went to the Prime Hook Reserve Museum, this is what the swampy area was called, and they had no idea what it could be. I am wondering if anyone else has seen it, and what the heck it is. The story takes place, I think, in the summer of 1995, making me 9 years old. Practically every other year, my family would take a trip to Florida. We would usually go to Disney World, but my mother was getting sick of that. So that year we actually didn't go to Disney World, to my sister and my dismay. On one of these days, we were on a beach. I don't remember what the beach was called, but the people sitting next to us mentioned it being the bottom tip of Florida. After a while of nothing happening, everyone was either in the ocean or sunbathing silently. A woman to the left of us pointed past us to our right, asking, "What is that?" We all turned and looked to a surprisingly vacant corner of the beach. There were no people down there, but what was there was something really strange. We all got up to get a better look, very quickly forming a crowd around it. If I had to describe the creature we saw in one word, that word would be cartoonish. I will never forget what it looked like. It was green and looked like a ball of slime about the size of a basketball. It had tentacles resting on the ground around it, with two longer tail-like tentacles sticking out of its back. The thing that was the most bizarre and made it look cartoonish were its eyes, which were on stalks that stood about a foot off of its body. The eyes looked creepily human, and just looked at us in an almost disinterested way. The other strange thing about it was its mouth, which never seemed to close, and where you'd expect teeth were tooth-shaped fleshy protrusions. No one, not even the creature, seemed scared, and after a while it lazily slithered back into the ocean. There were roughly 10 witnesses to this thing, and we all spent most of our time talking about what it must have been. One idea was that it was a parasite organism for a much larger creature, one also possibly never identified. You will never believe what I saw one very cold, dry November night. My family and I moved into a new house upon a hill, on a little back road, in the very small town of Fort Gay, West Virginia. Fort Gay sits right on the east side of Kentucky. The population of my town then was probably just a couple thousand. My family and I were unpacking. We had not yet put the furniture in its rightful places, and everything was still in boxes. Overwhelmed with working all day, I retired around 11 p.m. I put my little brother on the couch and I took his bed, since my bed wasn't put together yet. His room faces the front of the house. His window is around 20 to 25 feet or so off the ground. I was looking out the window when I saw it. It stood about 7 feet tall. I had no idea what it was, but I was frozen. I had never been that scared in all my life. All I could do was lay there and just stare at this thing. It was sitting in a tree about 50 feet or so off the ground, about 50 feet from the house across the yard. It felt like an eternity. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even blink. It had big, red, bright glowing eyes looking dead into my face. I finally worked up enough courage to close my eyes and put my head under the covers, when all of a sudden, this thing smacked the window. I went through the house screaming, "There's something outside!" I was crying. My mom and dad looked at me and said, "What's wrong with you? It looks like you've seen a ghost." My face was snow white. I said, "I don't know what it was, but please, Dad, don't go outside." I begged and I begged. He came back in and said there was nothing out there. I kept screaming, saying, "Yes, there is." When I explained to them what I saw and how I felt, they said I was crazy. But to this day, I will not go outside by myself. And even in the day, someone still has to watch me go to my car. I have heard of some pretty crazy things going on up on that road, but I never expected to experience anything myself. My husband and I went to the theaters and watched Mothman Prophecies. I was reliving that night all over again. The way they described feeling and what they saw was remarkable. My husband looked over at me and said, "Isn't that what you described to me when we first started dating?" I couldn't say a word. After that moment, I knew what I saw. I believe in all heart of hearts, I saw the Mothman. It's just a little weird. I only live about 80 miles south of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where it all took place 37 years ago. It was exactly 32 years to the month when I saw it. Back in September of 2004, I was hiking in the Arashiyama area outside of Kyoto, Japan. I had decided to leave the touristy area and set off alone in a random direction towards the mountains. I found myself on an old trail through the forest. After a while, I encountered an old man with a long white beard. He carried a staff and was dressed in coarse blue robes, like a peasant out of a samurai movie. He saw me and told me to follow him. Being more curious than anything, I walked after him as he led me further into the forest. He spoke at length about the beauty of nature, how people cut down forests and polluted the earth, and he told me that humans must learn to protect and respect nature. During the whole exchange, he never spoke about himself or asked any questions to me. After a while, he said he had to leave and showed me another trail, saying I should take it when I wanted to go back to the city. He then left by that trail. I happened to pass the same place on my way back that evening, so I took the trail the old man showed me. Only minutes later, I ended up completely lost and couldn't even find the trail itself to retrace my steps. It was getting dark out, and as I shone my flashlight around, I noticed an old white fox watching me from nearby. I could have sworn it was watching me with an amused look on its face, but as soon as I shone my light on it, it ran off into the bushes. I remember reading all sorts of old Japanese stories and legends about fox spirits that can take human form, and I feel like I may have seen one that day. Working as a police motorway patrolwoman in Portsmouth, England, I'm frequently confronted with situations that are both bizarre and unnerving. However, the incident that occurred on the 25th of November last year is by far the most unusual of them all. During a routine speed camera setup in the city, around 6:30 p.m., at which time it was completely dark, our speed trap picked up random tracings of non-existent objects hurtling past at 30 to 40 miles per hour. The devices are not actually known to malfunction, so we trained the camera on the road surface to see what we picked up. Sitting in the back of the patrol van, we were shocked to discover on the screen that the camera was picking up what can only be described as human figures, running up and down the street approximately 40 feet away from the vehicle, only barely visible through the night vision filter. They were of average height, had a silvery hue, and were sprinting up and down the central reservation, the dividing surface between the two opposite lanes on a motorway. They were sprinting repeatedly and very fast. I admit I did not exit the vehicle to investigate, but apparently I didn't have to. Only about 10 feet away, at the side of the road, one of these silvery entities just appeared on the screen. Female, approximately 6 foot, and standing motionless, facing away from the van. She was dressed in scantily clad clothing, not unlike that a young woman on an evening out may wear. I was extremely freaked out, especially considering that, leaning out of the window, there was absolutely no evidence of anyone standing that close to the vehicle. As the first vehicle, only 5 minutes from the first sighting, drove past, all available evidence of the entities had vanished. Nothing occurred from that time till the end of my duty at 9 p.m. And yet, when I played back the footage from the camera, the silvery objects and the woman are not on the tape. Obviously, I did not report the incident, but friends and fellow officers agree that it is highly unusual, and none of them had experienced anything of the like before. The following happened in Vidor, Texas, on June 20th, 2000, around 1 a.m. I just got off from work and was headed east. On this road, there is a 90-degree turn, and at times you have to watch because cattle might be out and on the road. That morning, that's what I thought had happened. No one else was on the road, but I saw red eyes that would look at the truck lights and look down over and over, and I knew something was not right. I was driving on the left side of the road, and when I got close, I noticed that this red-eyed creature stood about 5 foot tall and sported black hair all over its body. I stopped the truck and got out my spotlight and shined it on this creature. It seemed like forever, but I know that it was only a few minutes. This creature raised its arm above its head and let out a terrible scream that I have never heard before. It turned around and went behind a house and left. I have heard the sound before when I lived on Teal Road in Orange, Texas, just a few miles from this location. I have traveled this road many times, hoping to see this creature again, and never have. I'm told this creature is related to Bigfoot. I'm not entirely sure on the exact date of when this happened, but it would have been around 1999, maybe in the spring or summer. Living in Australia, you are bound to see strange things from time to time. Although most have an explanation behind them, this is different. I was young at the time, probably 9 or so. My family was having a barbecue in the backyard of our house. We were all sitting at this table on the patio, eating and talking, not really paying any attention to anything surrounding us. Suddenly, I heard a plop noise come from the leaf cover in the garden along the back fence. I immediately turned and looked to see what had made the noise. To my horror, I saw a small blue creature look at me, then run into the shrubbery. It was about 6 inches tall on all fours. It didn't have any toes that I could see. Its face was vertically oval-shaped, with small black eyes, a long protruding nose, and grimacing mouth filled with almost needle-like teeth. The outer of the face was dark blue, sort of like a mane, but it looked hairless. The rest of the body and the face was light blue. The best I can describe the body is that of like a lion, except with short legs, no tail, and less sculpted. I looked at my brother and he said, "What was that?" He had seen it too. When my mom calmed us down, she took my brother and me to separate rooms of the house and got us to draw what we had seen. We both drew the same thing. I was terrified for the rest of the night. To this day, I still don't know what the creature was that I saw, but it still gives me the creeps. Stories of skinwalkers, Bigfoot, and many other mythical beings seem to be a hot topic when it comes to scary stories. There seems to be tales to share no matter where in the United States you reside in. I live in northern Minnesota. Although we have some myths such as the Iceman, the Mystery Monster, and even Wendigos, I have always chalked these up to nothing more than stories. I mean, why would I believe otherwise? I didn't even believe in ghosts. I thought it was all just a bunch of mumbo-jumbo made up to keep people on their toes. Perhaps just ancient tales to keep people from trespassing or making bad decisions, such as camping alone. I've always lived a rather careful and isolated lifestyle anyway. So what stock did I really have to put into any of these tales? The story that I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy. I'm going to try and explain it to the best of my recollection, even though adrenaline leaves more minor details in a bit of a haze. You see, I'm having a hard time digesting that something like what I encountered exists, because this leaves all other possibilities on the table. Skinwalkers, Bigfoot, everything. they may be real as well. And that thought terrifies me. As I said, I live a very isolated life. This means I don't even know my own back roads very well, if at all. So, where the main road was closed whilst I went to pick up my brother from the bar in the city 20 miles away, I silently chewed myself out for not bringing a GPS. I do, however, have a general sense of direction and figured if I headed south and went back a little to the west, roughly 20 miles in, I could figure it out. I won't bore you with directions. The important part is, as I mentioned, I would have to take foreign back roads. Let me start from the beginning of the night and tell you some more about myself to add some more context. I was a 19-year-old shut-in. I spent most of my nights playing video games and feeding my caffeine cravings. I did have a part-time job working at a farm a few miles down the road. The pay wasn't great, but it did pay for new games when I wanted one, and other miscellaneous things. I was in that in-between spot in life, where I knew I was an adult, but trying to find out what I wanted to do with my life was a daunting mystery. My skill sets were, and are, far and few between, and living in the middle of nowhere, opportunities were at a minimum. One late June night, I was playing video games as I normally do. I think the game was Destiny, though it doesn't matter. It was roughly 12:30 a.m. when I got a text from my brother asking me to come pick him up from the bar. Keep in mind, bar closes at 1 a.m. He informed me he had no other ride, and I was his only option. It was just like him to pin something like this on me at the last minute. I wanted to chew him out for going out drinking all the time, but I felt it wouldn't help the situation currently at hand. Instead, I told him I'd be there, ASAP, and not to venture off. He has ventured off in the past, leaving me to look for him on the streets, since he's awful at replying to texts. I slammed the rest of my can of Mountain Dew, grabbed the keys to my 2002 Corolla, and headed out right away. About a mile in is where I made the realization that the main road was closed, so I took a second to think, threw on my blinker, and took the gravel road closest to it. If memory served me right, I thought I remembered this being a straight shot with maybe one turn at the end. Not a big deal, right? Of course not. If I made it in time, it really doesn't matter what route I take. A couple miles into the road, I was starting to really like the scene of my environment. The area I live in is fairly forested, but the trees here just seemed denser somehow. The road was as dark as it could possibly get, and it made me feel like I was in a horror movie. Which brings me to where things started getting strange. About 10 miles down the road, I started swearing the shadows weren't coordinating with my headlights properly. It's tough to explain, but it's like they were going outwards up top and inwards on the ground and in front. Now, I'm no expert when it comes to how shadows should react, but it was one of those gut feelings that something about this wasn't right. Before I knew it, I came to the end of the road. There was a T-section, and I promptly took a right. 1 mile down that road, and it brought me directly into the city. Simple enough. I had a moment of self-celebration as I was proud of myself for figuring it out first try. I knew the city fairly well. Well, I say city, but it really only has a population of 15,000 people. Around here, though, that is a city. I got to the bar and found my brother, just coming out with a few of his buddies. Perfect timing as well. I pulled in, hitting the curb as I did, so making it sound like my car was going to fall into pieces. It grabbed the attention of my brother and his friends, and they all started laughing as my brother waved them goodbye and made a light jog to my car. He hopped in, I backed out and we were back on our way to the secluded road. We made some conversation as I drove with my window halfway down, as to not get a contact drunk. Believe me, I've seen my brother drunk many times, but him going out all tonight was quite apparent. It wasn't long before I came across the T section again and took a left. My brother made a joke about me having to not take the main road, and how this is probably the first time I've seen a new road in years. I would have made a joke back, but I knew he was right. A couple miles in, I started noticing the shadows again. Brushing it off as nothing was my plan, but then my brother spoke up. "Does something seem off to you?" he asked. I was a bit taken aback, wondering if he was noticing the same thing I was. I responded with, "What do you mean?" He sat up a bit, surveying the shadows above us, and he leaned forward. "Maybe I've had too much to drink." At this point, my curiosity was piqued. "No, come on. What's on your mind, bro?" "I don't know. These shadows just seem off to me." My suspicion was correct. It couldn't be a coincidence that we both noticed the same thing. He started shuffling around, looking more and more uneasy. "We should turn around," he said. This was an odd request. I mean, I'm sure there are many other routes we could take. At this point, though, we were about 5 miles into the stretch. Seemed like a waste of time to do so. Odd shadows can't hurt us, right? He started to open his mouth again when his eyes widened and he yelled, "Stop!" I didn't hesitate. I hit the brakes as hard as I could without losing control. What happened?" I asked. "There's something in front of us." I looked ahead and couldn't see anything past the graveled cloud. We sat and waited for it to clear, my heart beating faster and faster with each passing second. Just as it seemed as though it would totally dissipate, something happened that I will forever have nightmares about. A face, about 2 feet long and a foot wide, slammed into the windshield with so much force it caused the windshield to start to crack. The face seemed to be made of shadows. As it jumped off the ground and formed before us, there was no hesitation between me seeing this and shoving the shift into reverse and punching the gas. As we were backing up at speeds too fast to truly control, the shadows started seeping in through the cracks. We were both panicking as my brother took off his shirt and began pushing it against the cracks. How he made this quick decision while being wasted still puzzles me, but maybe the adrenaline made him sober up fast. I started to slow down so I could, as safely as possible, turn around. I whipped the wheel to the left and threw the car in a 90-degree angle, kicking up more gravel clouds as I did so. I went to shove the shift into drive when I realized my car had stalled out. Turning the key over and over again, I was looking around for where this creature was. Then I saw it, through my open window, about 10 feet away, inching closer and closer with a grin that told me it knew it had us trapped. I took my hand off the key to reach for my window scroll to close it. Say what you will about this cheap design, but if I hadn't had it in that moment, I may not be typing this out right now. The creature, noticing the window was going up, moved with much more haste, closing a split second before the creature got to it. This seemed to anger it. It began screaming in a high-pitched wail that deafened me for a few seconds. Whilst all this was happening, my brother had the mental capacity to keep trying to start the car. Noticing it was still in drive, I pushed it into park. He turned it one more time, and the car started. Putting it back into drive, I took off once again in the opposite direction. We drove at speeds way too fast as we heard the stomping of the beast trying to keep up. It wasn't long before we reached the T section again, and I took a right turn, going as fast as I felt I could control. Knowing we weren't out of the woods yet, I stayed on it until we reached the city once more. Finally, hopefully, in safe territory. We parked on Main Street to catch our breath. My brother apologized profusely for making me come get him. It wasn't his fault. How could either of us have known something like this could happen? How could anybody? Luckily, there were many more routes to take back home, and he knew them all. We took the one with the least amount of trees and made it home, safe and sound. It's been a couple years since then. My brother and I don't talk about it, but we always advise people to stay off that road any time it is mentioned. He's quit drinking. Actually, I don't think he's had a sip since that night. I'm still a shut-in, but I do now have my own apartment in the aforementioned city. I work an office job there, and though it's nothing special, it works for now. That night left many scars on me. Every time I see a shadow, I wonder if it has come back for me. I've come to the conclusion that as long as I stay off that road, I should be safe. There have been a few disappearances in that area over the last year, and I think it is directly linked. As for Wendigos, or other things of the like, I now believe they could be out there. I still don't know what that creature was. A demon? A super-powered shadow person? Perhaps something else? It's tough to say. All I know is it doesn't hurt to keep your guard up. Most importantly, it doesn't hurt to stay off less traveled roads. What bothers me more than anything is not knowing if the shadows in the corner of my room at night are just shadows, or perhaps something more malevolent, waiting for its opportunity to strike once again. I'm writing this because I'm not sure who to reach out to. The police would laugh me off, and justifiably so. I considered reaching out to other sites or forums, but was finally led here by a good friend. One of the few people I could trust my story with. So, throwaway account, and a few hours later, here it is. Take it for what you will. If you don't believe me, cool. Hopefully I gave you some entertainment in reading this, but if you are one of the few who choose to believe though, thank you, truly. I don't know what my next step should be, and hopefully this post can spread and shine some light on the strange events that have been following me for the last 3 weeks. If anyone has any advice or knows what I'm up against, please don't hesitate to reach out. It all began almost a month ago when I was approached with this idea. For some backstory, but not too much for privacy concerns. I'm a photographer for a pretty well-known magazine. My job consists of mostly traveling to beautiful destinations, seeking out all there is to see, and snapping photos. Now, of course, there's more to it than that, and I take great pride in my work. But that's the gist of it. It truly is my dream job. Well, was my dream job. After all this, I don't know if I can continue. The subject of my latest adventure is in the U.S. Pacific Northwest. Specifically, the wild, wild wilderness it contains. My first stop, the Northern Cascades. Here I would be backpacking 20 miles into the national park with stops along the way. Loaded up with enough gear and food for 4 days, out in the wilderness, I began my trek. Now, I should say that my employer, well, they're not the most lucrative company in terms of how they treat their photographers. They pay well, but not that well, and hiring me an assistant out of the question. But the job does have its perks, including access to many places off limits to the general public, including the areas I would be visiting along my journey. Luckily, I've been doing this for a few years now, and hiking 20 miles in 60-degree weather is paradise compared to some of the things I've had to withstand in my career. Around 10 p.m. on the first day, I pitched my tent and hunkered down. Went over some photos of marmots, deer, and a fox that I had captured. Then put out the lantern and got some rest. I woke around 2 a.m. to a loud banging noise off in the distance. Not unusual, but still unsettling. The thing about camping alone, so far from anything, is there's no one to talk to. No one to bounce ideas off of, no one to rationalize with, and no one to calm you down when you can't keep it together. The noise subsided though, and so did my lucidity. My eyes fell heavy and I collapsed back into sleep. The next day went just as well and I reached my destination, catching some beautiful vistas along the way. After capturing everything I had set out to do, I made camp and relaxed for the night. Again, I awoke to loud banging, louder banging. This was definitely closer, and also accompanied by something new and incredibly unnerving. A noise that is so hard to describe. I tried thinking of ways to describe it, but the closest I could come would be to liken it to something like an owl's hoot, but much longer, and with the pitch lowered way down. Something like a bullfrog's croak, but even lower, much louder, and with that little weird coo that owls have. I've talked to several park rangers since then, and even played a recording that I caught on my phone, but no one has been able to identify it. If anyone has any idea, please let me know. It echoes in my mind even as I write this. It's hard to describe how bone-chilling it is, and I have no idea why. And to hear it when you're so far out, alone, with no cell service or any way of signaling for help. I can't even describe the feeling. Despite the enormous dread, the sound again went away after just a few moments. This time, though, getting back to sleep wasn't as easy. After an hour of laying in total silence, clenching my bear spray, I finally fell back asleep. But you want to know what the worst part was? Knowing the next morning that I still had 2 days left out here. Except that wasn't going to work for me. I packed up as fast as I could and began hiking back at a brisk pace. I worked out that if I walked it faster, with fewer breaks, I could make it back in a little over a day, meaning I would only need to stay one more day in this place, and that by then, I would be much closer to the busier trails and therefore safer. I walked 12 hours straight, with only 2 slight breaks, and managed to make it even further than I expected. At this pace, I could reach the truck by 1 a.m. if I walked straight through, and though I was exhausted as hell, that's exactly what I did. Everything went pretty well, until about 10:45 p.m., only a few minutes after total darkness had fallen over the forest, when again, I began hearing the noise. The sounds had an otherworldly quality to them, like a cat's purr if you reversed it, lowered the pitch, and filtered it through a megaphone. My legs were burning, but it didn't matter. I walked even faster. No matter how fast or slow I walked, though, the noise always sounded the same distance away. It never got closer to me, but it was always close, seemingly just out of eyesight. After over an hour of this nightmare, I caught a glimmer of the brown trailhead sign, and beyond that, the reflection of my Jeep's headlights. I ran, threw my supplies in the back tailgate, and hightailed it out of there. But this is where things get even weirder. As I was pulling away, in my rearview mirror I caught a small glimpse of what was causing the noises. At the time, I didn't know what I was seeing. Something tall, very tall, with a darkness around it that seemed to repel the ambient red glow from my taillights. Around it, a long, tattered robe, steamingly crimson in color. Though this could have been due to my tail light's glow. Either way, the image was visually striking and physically jarring. As the dust trail left by my Jeep grew in size, the figure slowly faded back into the surrounding forest. Now, if this all sounds crazy, well, you're right, it is. I have been to some incredible places, and some very frightening places, but I have never seen or felt anything like this before. But it doesn't end there, unfortunately. 2 days later, the next wing of my trip took me to Mount Rainier National Park. Now, I was a little nervous still, but now I was 200 miles away. Whatever it was surely gone now. If you've never been, the sheer vastness and beauty of MRNP is breathtaking. So after half a day of taking in the sights, the uneasiness faded away. Even the first night went by without issue. A little hesitant at first, I quickly felt relaxed enough to drift to sleep, staring up at the stars through the observation window in my tent. Waking the next morning, I found nothing out of place and nothing suspicious, confirming that whatever it was truly was far away. Another 2 days of hiking went by without any issues or disturbances, aside from a few cougar sightings and a pack of wolves in the distance on my second night. It wasn't until my last night that I experienced it again. Sleeping on my last night, less than 3 miles from my Jeep, the same noises woke me in the middle of the night. Except this time it was very, very close. I shot up, grabbed my light, and shined it outside the tent. Immediately the light caught a glimpse of what I could now confirm was an old tattered crimson red robe gliding behind a giant evergreen. I became frozen in fear. My still waking mind could not even comprehend what I was seeing, or what was happening. The demonic, purring noises seemingly teased me from behind the tree. Now fully lucid, I began to contemplate my options. Option 1. Make a run for it, leaving all my gear behind, the least likely. Not only would I be leaving literally tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment, but I would have no chance of sprinting the 3 miles needed to reach the Jeep. Besides that, whatever this was had to be fast to reach me so quickly, and also incredible at tracking. So, option 1 was a no-go. Option 2. Spray this thing with the bear spray, and then run for it. Only slightly better than option 1, but still not viable. And option 3. The least fun, but probably most logical option. Remain in the tent until morning, and defend myself if I have to. And so I did. I'm not sure what time I woke up. I was too nervous to even look at my phone. But I do know it was hours before sunlight. About 30 minutes after the first rays reached my tent, the noises finally went away. It was another 45 before I felt safe enough to pack up and begin the hike back. I reached my Jeep and again broke every law in the park on my way out, leaving tire tracks in the freshly paved road out. I rented a hotel and regrouped, talking to a few friends of mine who were frequent hikers in the area. None of them had ever experienced anything like this, and only one actually believed everything I was saying. I decided to skip my next two stops, Olympics National Park and the Hoh Rainforest. Employer be damned, it doesn't take a genius to realize that this would be a bad idea. So I decided to just go straight for my last stop, a much safer option, Canyon Beach, Oregon. Here I would just be taking some photos of the legendary Haystack Rock at different times of day, sunrise, sunset, and some astrophotography shots with the rock as my subject. Even better, I would be staying in a seaside room with a view of the rock, so I could take shots from my balcony without even going outside. Again, the first day went by with no issues. Photos came out great, and it was time to get my rig set up for some time-lapse photos of the rock against the night sky. Seeing as I was on the 3rd floor and everything was automated, I decided to let the rig do its work and get some rest. Because of the skip stops, I would have extra days here in case they didn't come out perfect the first time. I woke the next morning to find my entire setup on the ground outside the balcony. The whole thing weighed close to 50 pounds. So even though the gusts near the shore got pretty strong, I was doubtful that this was the cause. Luckily, nothing was damaged, so I wasn't too concerned. Until I checked the SD card. The first 2 hours of the time-lapse went great, but then something odd started to emerge in the photos. In the corner of each frame, a red tint began to slowly encompass the image, until the photos were nothing but crimson red cloth. That was last night, and I'm afraid things aren't getting better. I'm packing the Jeep and planning on leaving for the airport immediately, but something strange happened again. Today, in broad daylight, as I was catching one last look at the beach and all the tourists taking photos, atop the rock, I saw a tall, dark figure in a long, tattered, crimson robe. Update. I caught a flight back to Florida late last night, and have just been resting and trying to get back to some normalcy since. Reading comments and suggestions helps, and hopefully nothing sinister was truly at work at all. It's also possible that I had begun to go stir crazy, and I have made an appointment for Monday with my doctor to get checked over. So far, nothing too weird has happened, but I can't shake the weird feeling that I'm still being followed. Odd noises and shadows playing tricks with me. Monday can't come soon enough. I have a friend coming over to stay tomorrow night. Hopefully some beer and video games will put my mind at ease. If anything new comes up, I'll be sure to update everyone. Update 2. I don't know what is going on and I'm scared. My friend never showed up last night. I've spent all morning calling him, texting him, along with calling friends and family to see where he is, and no one has any clue. I know it's only been one night, but I'm considering going to the cops. But would they even do anything so soon? He wouldn't go radio silent like this. This morning, though, I thought I heard a noise again. Could be my mind messing with me. I haven't slept good in days. Going to try and drive to the station. I'll update soon.